Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, your source of strategies and insights to make you a better leader. Influence, improve, inspire.
So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I am delighted to bring you Dr. Amy Silver today. Amy, she speaks. She is an author and she's a mentor on how to grow powerfully. She has, get this, a doctorate in clinical psychology, a master's in forensic psychiatry, which sounds scary, and a master's in performance, and a BSc Hons in psychology. She's a head shrinker. Looking forward to hearing about that. She worked as a practicing clinical psychologist and an academic tutor and researcher at Oxford University. So she's a pom, and we love her for that. After a short stint as a professional actress, totally want to hear about that, Amy has worked in corporate cultures for 15 years using psychological knowledge and effective conversations. She works with brave organizations, and I think that is a really important distinction, being brave, who want to have effective conversations that activate trust and sustainable growth. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Oh, there is so much richness in your background and your expertise. And it's perfectly timed from my point of view. I just got off the phone with a client where the lack of feedback giving in the culture is significant. And it's resulted in people carrying somebody who's really not up to scratch in their job, and they take on all their work because there is not a culture of giving and receiving feedback and having those trusting conversations. So there is a huge lack of trust and confidence in the organization. So before we get into the detail of all your wisdom there, personal one. So how did you end up in Australia? That's part one. And part two is acting. What's going on with that? Tell us a bit about that.
Okay, so my history with Australia was born from love of my husband, who just put it out there when we first met and said, if we are to be together, if it is to be successful, that is where we're going to live. So at the time, I was deeply in love with him. I still am, kind of, but I'm not sure I would have made it quite as quickly as I did back then. It was pretty tough, I have to say, coming on somebody else's dreams. But I built my own dreams here, and I think there's something incredible about Australia in that it is a world where it's so new in many ways that it has, I think, an enormous amount of hope about our future. So that's really just a beautiful space to be in professionally, because people want to make a difference. People want to embrace change. And I guess that's why my work has really taken off here, because there's just an appetite to better our workplace. And acting was probably my first midlife crisis, maybe my second midlife crisis. I was pretty senior. I was working, I'd done the kind of the climb in my profession. I was working with the most exciting group of psychologists doing, incredible research and incredible opportunities to learn and give, and it was amazing. But it also got pretty heavy. Being in clinical psychology, it's you're surrounded by, I guess, difficult situations, people who for no fault of their own have found themselves in really difficult lives, difficult situations. And I wanted to lift out of that a little bit and learn how to get back in touch with my playful side. When you're doing therapy, it's pretty still. You're trying not to reflect your own stuff. So I wanted to sort of explore and break out and use my body again and explore space a little bit. And lift up, because when you go very deep in something, it's sort of tunnel vision starts to come in, and it's the irony of the expert, really. You get sort of locked in, and I really wanted to pull myself out. So I thought I was having a year off, ended up getting picked up by an agent, and did a few years on the stage in London. So very, very fringe. That makes it sound like I was very successful. I wasn't, but it was fun. It was really fun.
Wow.
And I think I learned a lot of skills that are very helpful to me now. So I'm very grateful that I've got that as part of my background.
Oh, that's pretty wild. And so what was your most favorite role for your year on the stage?
Oh, that's the disappointing thing about acting, is that the favorite roles for me was, I didn't see psychology and acting as that dissimilar, really. They were around trying to understand somebody's motivations and why somebody would behave in a certain way, who they were as a person, what they were trying to do in their lives, and how they chose to communicate. And that wasn't really that different for me. So that the opportunities where I had the chance to really sit down and dissect a character with a group of other people who were also dissecting their characters, and we would discuss these personalities and these behaviors and these choices that they were making. And that was just thrilling to be part of a team, doing that. But that didn't pay. So the things that paid were things like, meaningless sort of commercials, or, things that just didn't really connect with me for the purpose that I was interested in. So that was the shame, really, is that the things that I loved were the opportunities to really deep dive into, you'd have 6 weeks of rehearsal before a play. That was just delicious. You're all sitting around just talking and really trying to understand people's personalities. So that was perfect for me.
Cool. So you've left the world of acting. You've followed love to Australia and fallen in love with Australians and the hope for the future. So this notion, and your first book, by the way, Conversations Create Growth, which is a fabulous handbook for people to actually have tough and useful conversations. We talk about performance conversations, the annual performance review. So, and I was, as I mentioned, just talking to a client who says he doesn't even bother reading the feedback anymore in his performance review, the annual thing, because he thinks it's just all this lip service, ingenuine or non-genuine stuff. Why? So that's somebody who's given up on them altogether. Why are they dreaded? And what is all the negativity around performance reviews all about?
I think that we don't like them for a number of reasons. First of all, they take up too much of our time. So there was Deloitte was probably one of the leaders in this. They moved away from performance reviews, and before they did that, they assessed how much time across the firm they were using to complete the appraisals, and they said there was 1.8 million hours across the firm that
per
it
year
took for that. How ridiculous is that? So, and I think that time, which, in smaller organization is assessed to be takes about 5 weeks of the year for an average manager to do appraisals. It's just too costly for us to ignore. So I think it comes down to then, well, are they of value? Because if that time is well spent, then that's great. But it doesn't look like that's the case. We know that most, or I think it was 58% in a recent study by a consultancy group, said that 58% of HR executives considered them to be an ineffective use of supervisors' time. So we're not actually seeing the value that we should from the time that we invest. So I think that's has started a movement towards trying to figure out, well, why do we do them? Where have they come from, and are they relevant anymore? Because things have kind of changed. There's a move away from, I guess, where it started, which was trying to sort of see, well, how many widgets have we done in a day, and who is the least of the widget providers or the widget makers, and then it's probably a bit more relevant if we're sort of just looking for output. And I guess earlier in the performance reviews history, if you like, we were in quite a stable world where what we planned to do in a year's time actually what we did. Things now, our cultures, our societies, our roles, our jobs, our organizations, their goals are changing so fast that actually it's hard to predict whether what we're producing now or in the past is a good reflection of or a good predictor of what we're going to produce. So because of this sort of VUCA world that we're in.
Okay, so VUCA, we need to explain that for folks who haven't heard it before.
Sure. So VUCA is, I guess, an anagram to describe where we are at the moment in our work cultures. So VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. So these kind of environments that we're in, which I'm sure we will all recognize, and all your all the people listening will recognize, things move so fast. So it's really hard to predict what it is that we want to count, what it is that we're trying to measure. And so that's one reason why it's becoming harder. We're not counting widgets anymore. We're needing to move. We're needing to be agile, and that agile thinking isn't reflected in this once-a-year performance tracking. And so what happens is that we become disengaged from those figures, those performance checks, or those performance numbers, because they don't tie in with what it is that we're actually doing. They don't feel like they have the purpose attached to them. And I think overall, my biggest kind of concern about performance reviews is that what has become important is the process of the performance review rather than what it is that we're actually trying to do. And I think what we're actually trying to do is help people grow, help people improve, help people feel like they're achieving, help people feel like they're stretching towards new things. So when the performance review is in such a different sort of mindset from that growth mindset, I think that's when people start to find it really disengaging. And as you say, it's not just the people who are being reviewed that find it disengaging, it's the reviewers. And it's like we've kind of introduced this barrier to human connection, a barrier for us to think clearly about what is needed for somebody to feel like their performance is moving forward.
So it's a fundamental shift from acknowledging achievement to focusing on how can we grow even further. That's a pretty big shift, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think we need as humans to celebrate success. I think we need to feel like we are making moves towards something and that is being noticed. But the links to what it is in terms of its meaning needs to be clearer. So the meaningfulness of the measures needs to be really thought through effectively. And I think one of the habits that we've got into with performance reviews is using the past as a sort of a review. It's actually a review, so it's kind of looking backwards, when in fact what I think we should be doing is looking forward. So that's where the distinction comes from. It's like, how do we move forward? How do we grow into the future? How do we progress, rather than what was the output of the past?
Okay, that makes sense to me. So the performance conversations that I'm familiar with since last time I was in a job, which was some time ago now, was let's look at what you did. Great. Hurrah, hurrah, celebration, success, or accountable for what didn't get done. Not much was done on the what's next and what do you want, apart from what development do you want, which is sort of like what kind of training do you want to get, which sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So it's difficult to then pluck something out of the sky. And if you have no idea what's on offer, then it's problematic. So what framework or what suggestions do you have for leaders and managers who want to take this idea of conversations for growth? What do you put in that side of the conversation about, like, okay, how are we going to grow you forward? how do you lead a conversation like that?
So I think first of all, I think it's important for me to say I don't necessarily think that we should be getting rid of performance reviews, but I do think that because I do think they have a function to sort of dip in, deep dive, as it were, sort of twice a year maybe, on what's going on. But I think that this focus of those performance reviews should be around how are we performing as a pair, manager and direct report. So it's less of a what do you need to do to get better? What do you need in order to move forward? And more a case of a biannual check-in on how are we doing? How have we moved you forward? What could we be doing better? Where are our meetings working and where aren't they? Where do we need to put in more support? And it's a much more sort of together approach rather than it being located strictly in the individual. So that my goal with the messaging that I'm giving on this is that I enable people to have more regular conversations, ongoing conversations where that feedback that you mentioned at the beginning of this interview is immediate, is happening all the time. It's not being stored and impacted by bias and stories and then given with all these kind of like emotional entanglements that make it very difficult to extract the meaning, but that feedback is ongoing and these conversations between a manager and a direct report are ongoing, so that then these biannual appointments, if you need to keep them, are a sort of a review of those, a review of how are we doing. So and I think there's, you asked about what do you do in those meetings? How do you do it? I think there's I mean, obviously when we have the Edge of Leadership conference, we'll talk more about what's involved with helping people grow. How do people grow? What triggers need to be pulled when you want to help someone grow? Because that's really what I'm passionate about, is this idea that these conversations create growth. We need to use these conversations as an aid rather than sort of relying on a process that may not fit your organization anymore, may not fit the individual, and certainly doesn't fit with the information that we know about psychological safety and how if we don't feel safe, we're not going to be able to use that as an opportunity for growth. So we'll talk more about what's involved with growth, but from a very sort of theoretical perspective, I think, or a mindset perspective, we want to be able to talk about what those improvements are or what those things look like from quite a dispassionate position. So we don't want to locate the problem within the person, or we don't want to locate even the achievement within the person, because as soon as we locate it in the person, we start to silo people. And what we want to be doing in our future companies is building our reliance and ability to work in collaboratively. So we don't want to really necessarily locate the thing in the person. We want to do it from a dispassionate position, because from a dispassionate position we can, separate the emotion from the action. And then we're going to get a clearer sort of plan for what to do about the action. Does that make sense? We're trying to sort of step away from people. So we're not saying you need to do X, Y, and Z in order to be promoted or whatever. We're saying, okay, so this task I've noticed, this is something that if you wanted to be noticed as being this sort of a person, these are the tasks that might need to be developed. What sort of things would have to happen for that task to be developed? So you're sort of detaching it from the person, and that makes it easier for that person to be an active participant in working out what the solution is. If they feel too attached to this conversation being about them as a person, that's when it all starts to be very confusing for them in their minds in terms of the emotional distraction progress.
So
I think that's my first point. Yeah.
So I understand that as a sort of corrective or aspirational thing. Does it work though if you're looking at celebrations? So, I understand, like, okay, let's detach you from the person. These are the things and tasks that need to happen in order to get to this result. So when you're looking at what has the person contributed to, aren't we just going back to associating person with achievement? Or is there some other way of doing it?
I think we want to be using as many opportunities as we have to develop this system thinking for organizations. We're a culture, however sort of far you want to take that into the sort of, we're a system, a family system, or a functioning kind of agile community, or whatever language makes sense for your business. We need to move away from ego. And so, yes, we want to feel a sense of achievement, but not necessarily as far as sort of owning all the success for yourself. So it might be that you can take pride from helping others, or you can take pride from creating something together. I think when we get too caught in what we have done as an individual, what we have brought individually, it's a disengaging. It disengages that person from the rest of the people that are there. So you're trying to, or certainly I'm trying to, increase people's awareness of our interdependence, and that success is interdependent. Because if it isn't, then we're sort of making some sort of reference to the fact that we probably don't need each other, which obviously for me goes against all the engagement stuff.
So
that make sense?
It does. And I think it requires a high level of leadership maturity to embrace that concept. And I'm thinking about a legal firm, for example, where this is one of the organizations that struggles with embracing this kind of concept, because they rate people according to billable hours and how much business you bring in. So there is very much an individual accountability for that. And if people aren't meeting their budgets, then they are counseled. So there is very much a individual aspect of it, even though there is also a recognition that they're all in it together, and some people have responsibilities for marketing and culture and so on. And I think it's the balance of how do we stand out and how do we fit in. It seems to me there's a tension between that. And the more mature we are as leaders, then the need to stand out fades a little. However, in my experience, and you might have a totally different experience, I'd like to hear this, is toning down people's egos is difficult if they haven't got the leadership maturity to do that yet. So how do you help people feel like they're being acknowledged and appreciated while still being part of a system?
Yeah, as you say, it's a really difficult thing for some people to get their head around, particularly when our whole, really, most of our lives has been around ranking and passing and failing, and exams and being in the top 5% or whatever. That's our training. That's how we've been trained. Although interestingly, I'm not sure that school children now are being trained like that. But we were certainly trained to be competitive and to be goal focused and goal rewarded. So yeah, I think it's incredibly hard. I think that the evidence of how that is, leading to command control leadership, rather than what will probably be more relevant in the future, which is a much more sort of open and transparent organization that has more connection with their consumers, their customers. There's more transparency on what's going on behind closed doors. The competitive side of that ego will potentially start to change. Malcolm Gladwell, who's a bit of a guru in the leadership space anyway, is recently talking about things like strong link and weak linked cultures, where the past really celebrated what he called a strong link culture, where there would be a one particular person or an ego who basically needed to be protected because they were the ones that brought the money in. And I guess what you're talking about is sort of those little channels of strong links where those strong links are needed in order to function. But he talks about how weak link cultures are potentially where the future is, where we need to build the whole system of competency rather than having these kind of key drivers that are very competitive and command control leadership. We need to really think about how an organization and how a culture serves its customers, serves its clients, serves each other, because that's really where the relevance is going to come for businesses. Those that rely too heavily on the ego-driven style, I think are becoming are going to have their time. They're going to become less relevant, less able to keep hold of their staff, and less able to stay relevantly attached to their clients. But that's my prediction of the future based on, I guess, a lot of research that's coming out about the downside of command control leadership, the downside of competitiveness, the downside of, we used to sort of, I talk about psychological safety a lot, and it used to be something that particularly in consultancies, they were trying to make almost sort of capitalize on people's insecurities. It wanted to drive people to perform, but we know that that's just, it's not sustainable, and it leads to so many downsides in terms of damaging behavior, risks to people's mental health, risks to mistakes not being picked up, and just all the bad side of competitive cultures.
That's fascinating, and I like that picture of the future where it is a collective systems approach to success, where we're all in it together and we're here to support each other, and that none of us is better than all of us. And I think that is something that we can definitely sink our teeth into. So the question around that, so if that's the future and if that's the case, how do we inspire and how do we motivate people differently? Because you've pointed to the past of command and control and competitiveness was how we inspired and motivated. How do we then inspire and motivate now if we're moving to a systems integrated, a collaborative culture?
Yeah, I'm really pleased you use the word inspire, because that's much more meaningful to me than motivation. I mean, I know that you had Jason Fox last year talk, so I'm sure he's got unbelievably fascinating things to talk about motivation. But I think that motivation quite often is something that we locate within a person. They are not motivated. And I think inspiration, again, pushes us to think about our role in that as leaders, and how do we inspire people, because that's the question, I guess, is how do we enable people to want to give their best, want to do their best, and maybe sort of surpass their expectations. So, the extrinsic motivations are that we've talked about, money or role, title. Those sorts of things are, I think, incredibly important. I don't think that they're unimportant, and they provide people with clarity over where they're at and a visible sort of marker. I think that they are, though, not the important bit, so that they are hygiene factors, really, for me. They're the sort of the basics, and if we rely on them too heavily, then actually what we do is reduce the intrinsic stuff that we feel that we're moving forward. And I guess we can go very quickly to Dan Pink, who talks a lot in this area about what it takes for somebody to feel connected and that they want to be stretching. He talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So autonomy is obviously being able to choose your outcome, choose your direction. And again, I mean, there's so much being spoken about the younger generations, but I don't think it's that untrue for the older generations too. We need to have some sort of level of fulfillment and connection with what we're doing, and autonomy is part of that, is being able to choose our direction. And I think, things like you mentioned the law firms, and I work a lot with professional services, and I think that you can really feel this palpable change that's going on, where the grads who are coming in, they're just not willing to do those 5 years of graft that maybe people were happy to do 20 years ago. They want to have that autonomy now. They want to have that connection with what they're doing, that purpose now. They're not willing to wait and do the hard yards, because that's what we've always done. So I think that inspiration piece, we really need to be clever and smart about what that means, and not using ourselves as a judge, because often we're coming from a slightly different perspective than the person that we're talking to, but focus on what is the meaning for them, what are they trying to do, and how able are they to move, how controlling are we being, and by being controlling, are we reducing their autonomy, their capacity to choose ways forward. In some ways it's kind of like, if you know anything about the agile world, that's been born out of a desire to move away from this controlled, highly predicted world of performance management, performance conversations, enabling people to do their jobs. And agile is really just saying, well, what if this world is so unpredictable now, if this world is moving so fast and we're all quite different, then how do we help people adjust on the fly? How do we help them kind of go, do you know what would be good? This would be good. And this is a totally different direction from what we talked about 3 months ago. Or what I actually really need is this in order to get this job done. And so that autonomy, purpose part of our world, I think, is really important. And the techniques that we would use to do that, from my point of view, from a psychology point of view, we're trying to, rather than push people into something, we're trying to sort of move out the way. I always sort of describe it as, we don't want to corner people in the room. We want to step aside so they can walk through. So I see myself, and I ask the people that I work with, leaders, to think of themselves as enablers of other people's success. So how do we enable them to do what it is that they want to do? And that might require the conversations. What are you actually interested in? What do you care about? What would make this a good month? How would you assess where you're at the moment and where you need to be? So it's evolved from a conversation, and it's a coaching style. It's the humble leadership. It's being conscious of understanding what pulls somebody, and sometimes that's you pushing, you putting the aspiration out there and pulling them. That, I don't know if you've ever had that sense where you just somebody believes in you, or somebody suggests something to you and you think, oh, I hadn't even seen that as an avenue. I hadn't even thought about that as something that I could do. And just by you putting it out there, you've started to lay the tracks of inspiration. And as you say, you just don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, and I like that. I've had that experience before where a leader has seeded something in me that it was not even anywhere remotely on my radar. And they give you this little seed and you kind of go, huh, and you water it and you get to play with it until it becomes part of you and part of your aspirational vision.
Amy, some of it is around sort of just making the environment inspirational. So it's sort of, surrounding people that you work with opportunities to see things, to hear things, to stretch their imagination. or it could be something very practical. What tools and resources or time do they need to be able to do something that's requires a certain energy from them. That can also be inspiring.
So you've got some fabulous tips here already. One of them is creating an environment where people can learn and explore and stretch. What would be 3 other tips you'd give to leaders to be more inspiring or to create conversations for growth? So what can we do to help move us towards this collaborative, engaged, mutually supportive culture?
I think that something really simple that we can do is use the word we instead of you or I, and really start to place yourself in the system of somebody else's growth. I think there's heaps to say that the biggest calling in leadership is this opportunity to enable other people's growth, and I really believe that that's where I get engaged with my work, is where I feel like I'm enabling other people. So it's not just the engagement of the direct report; it's your engagement. You feel better if you've helped. So I think just using the word "we" is. It changes the context. It's a much more sort of we're together, we're the same side of the table. When I used to do therapy, cognitive behavioural therapy, we sit on the adjacent corners of the table. We're not sitting opposite each other, facing each other. We're together working with a piece of paper on the table that we're sharing. So I think anything that you can do to enable you to be working together on it. This is a project for both of you. And that adds to that sort of dispassionate, I'm not locating it in you kind of attitude. So yeah, that would be my first tip. I think, you mentioned about feedback, and I can't go past the idea that the feedback for me, or the reason that we're not particularly good at feedback, is because we get caught in avoidance. We just don't like being uncomfortable. And so that's a tool or a muscle that we need to build, is getting over ourselves. Who am I to think that I'm, my feelings are more important than giving you some feedback that's going to help you. So I guess being really quite proactive with dealing with the muscle that helps you cope with and tolerate the uncomfortable feelings of giving feedback. Because I guess the third tip is that the more specific, the more timely the feedback is, the more helpful it will be, and the less emotionally bound and the less clouded it will become. The faster, the most immediate, the most specific, forward-focused feedback is going to be the smartest route to enable somebody to grow.
Cool. And I think on this, I'd love to get your advice. So for my client, because this last point about being specific and timely, he is dealing with a long-standing relationship where the other people, including him, have been complicit in carrying this underperformer. How do you then broach the topic if it's been 20 years of doing this? Is there a breakthrough method you've got for saying, okay, it's time to clear the decks and actually get to the heart of the matter and deal with this? Have you got suggestions around that?
No. I think look, it's almost, you have to take full responsibility for this. They have enabled this situation to develop, and I think that they need to take full responsibility for correcting it, and it's going to be tough. And that's why I really like fast feedback, because it gets it off the plate and you don't have that build up of emotion. But if you've managed to avoid it with other people enrolled as well, just imagine the amount of offline conversations that this has taken, and how unproductive this has been to bottom line stuff. It's just crazy. So in terms of what to do, I think honesty has to be the best policy. I think that there needs to be a recognition of how, again, I go back to this, we have found ourselves in this position, and huge amounts of responsibility taken for the avoidance of the uncomfortable and the avoidance of having difficult conversations. There's no easy way. I think that the hardest thing to do would be, or the easiest thing to do would just be to make it very sort of them focused. It's their fault, and just make some sort of metric-based decision, and just very sort of rationally. That would be the easiest thing to do, and in my mind, the most unhelpful for everybody. I think, that you have to go through what will be a very difficult process, difficult conversations where there is a lot of we did this and we haven't done this, and we have been talking about you behind your back. It's going to be hard, but it's the most helpful for everybody, because it sort of pushes people on in their emotional intelligence and gives this person some insight into how this has happened, because otherwise they walk away feeling like it's all them. And in fact, what you're saying is it's not all them. It's the system that has created this.
Absolutely. Ooh, okay. Well, that's good. Thank you. I thought maybe there was an easy way out of it, but no, there is not.
There is an easy way. It's just not very helpful. But that's right. It's easy but not helpful.
Fantastic. Amy, thank you so much for sharing with us on the podcast today. I am super excited to have you speak and engage with everybody at the Edge of Leadership on conference coming up 23rd of March here in Canberra. And the attendees will get a chance to take a deeper dive with you on the skills and expertise of creating a safe place and having those conversations for growth. You'll be able to get the notes and Amy's bio and see her beautiful face at the podcast show notes, which are at zoerouth.com/podcast/Amy Silver. I was thinking about calling this the Hi-Ho Silver page. We can just go Hi-Ho Silver at the Edge of Leadership on conference.
Yeah.
So Amy, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I can't wait to see you at the conference.